September 11th, 2001 is a defining date for New Yorkers and countless others around the nation and world. While the greatest loss will always be the thousands that perished that day, the city also lost the iconic World Trade Center complex. While the majority of the complex has been rebuilt in the 2 decades since, one key missing building is 2 World Trade, the replacement of the South Tower which previously held that name. Let's discuss a bit about the original complex and then show you 3 different designs proposed for this forgotten tower. And we'll dive immediately into our recreation of New York here. Let's first talk about that original complex which opened in the early 1970s. Pretty controversial at the time, but really became to be so iconic of New York and seen in a variety of TV shows, movies, video games, you name it. Now, in the current complex, you have these lovely memorial pools showing the original footprints of World Trade Center 1 and 2, the North and South Towers, respectively. In that original complex, the other buildings, World Trade Centers 3, 4, and 5, and 7, were relatively low-slung office buildings, nothing of particular note, except maybe for World Trade Center 7, which used to be back here, which was built at a later date. Now, after the attacks, there was a lot of discussion in New York, of course, about how to rebuild the complex. Some wanted to rebuild it exactly as it was. Some people came up with radical designs. Many thought it shouldn't be used for anything. But of course, such valuable real estate was never going to go unused for too long. So not too long after the attacks, just a few years after, work really did start to begin. I think the cornerstone was originally laid for World Trade Center 1 in 2007, when it was then still known as the Freedom Tower. So let's discuss where the current buildings are in the complex. This, of course, is World Trade Center 1, aka the Freedom Tower, although that is not an official name. Its height from base to the top of the spire is 1,776 feet, reflecting the year that the US declared independence. And I'm pretty happy with this design in general. I know some people don't like it, and I don't love the kind of base that it has. It's really heavy duty, almost like you're scared of being attacked again base. I think how many people tend to describe it, but I think it's become quite iconic in New York itself. But that's World Trade Center 1. 7 was rebuilt quickly in that same location. And World Trade Centers 3 and 4 were built, 3 here and 4 here, much, much larger than they had been in the past. Because I know some of you will be pedants and say it in the comments, yes, there is also a planned World Trade Center 5 for the new complex that has also not been built. That was slated to be built on this patch of land right here. This area is a park covering a parking garage for some of the activities around here. Of course, there's lots of other things going on in this complex. You have the World Trade Center Museum here. The 9/11 Museum, I should say, and if you ever have the chance to come visit New York, it's absolutely a site worth visiting. Just really quite moving. It's not beloved by all New Yorkers, I will say that. I think it has generated some controversy over the years, but personally, I thought it was a nice experience. Then here you have the Performing Arts Center, which is no real asset in the game, so I improvised. That was recently completed, as was the Orthodox Church, which actually sits right here. The other iconic building in this complex, while not part of the World Trade Center itself, but part of the connected transit complex, is the Oculus, this wildly overpriced leaking monstrosity that really does quite look nice inside, although in some ways kind of feels like a mall. But what you'll notice, of course, is this giant gray square, uninhabited, unpopulated square right in the middle of Lower Manhattan. And in reality, this block is not completely empty. Actually, the original building that was intended to be here was built to its foundation, to street level essentially. And all it's going to take is somebody to come along and use it as a foundation and build whatever they want there. The problem is, what do they want to build? And here's where we'll start to talk about these three options. And before I even start, let me know down below, what is your favorite option? I know what mine is, but let's go through them first. The original design, and we'll back out here. If you ever want to look these up, these are also often referred to as 200 Greenwich Street. The original design by Norman Foster of Foster & Partners is this design here. If I can get it to align properly, let's just smack it down and I'll twist it around for you. This personally is my favorite. That looks about right. So the first thing you'll notice about World Trade Center 2 is that it is always, and in all of these options, is meant to be the second largest building in the complex. Not quite as big, of course, as World Trade Center 1, but still larger than 3 and 4, which I think 3 is a super tall and 4 is not far off, so they're not small buildings in the first place. I love this design with the kind of sloped, angled diamond shapes sloping down towards the memorial, allowing shafts of light to come in. Now, the reason why this design never got built is, of course, timing. Well, timing and money. It's always money when it comes to these things. But it was designed by Norman Foster and Foster & Partners, but then the Great Recession came along in the late aughts and prevented this from going forward, while the folks who own the complex looked for anchor tenants to be in such a large building. And with the recession at the time, there was very little demand for that. So while this design was quite iconic and I think well liked, it never actually happened. The next design that came along is this design by Big, the Bjarke Ingels group. And again, let's see if I can get this to align properly. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Let's just align this within the block. Building looks like maybe it's a little bit bigger than my actual design, but that's probably a scaling issue, no big deal. This is an interesting design, and yes, before you ask, this is the way that it was meant to be. Not with the stacks facing the complex, which to me would be reflective of the diamonds sloping down, but it was meant to look like a terrace structure from the eastern elevation, while it looked like a more standard front-facing but really cantilevered design from the west-facing direction. And you can see these not only are these boxes stacked, but they're kind of stacked so that they slope just slightly upward and into the complex. This design, I would say, was pretty much reviled when it was announced. I think people really, for the most part, preferred the Norman Foster design. And this design just felt kind of soulless, kind of, like I think someone had referred to it as, like a child stacking blocks, in their playroom, which you could totally see a kid taking those wooden blocks and making something, seeing how tall they can make it before it falls down without being too precarious. Not that we want to think about these buildings falling down, of course. I don't love this design. Let me know what you think down below. Now, the third design, there is no asset for. It was only announced in early 2022. I'm going to put it on the screen right here. This is from the original announcement. Now, this design actually goes back to the original architect, Norman Foster at Foster & Partners. This is the design that's been floated most recently, but there is still no anchor tenant. And I would tend to think that whichever tenant comes in here and says, hey, we want to take 30 floors of this building up, might have a heck of a good say on which design actually gets built. The latest updated design was meant to kind of reflect the needs of the modern market in a post-COVID world. So you're seeing this trend of the green terraces stacked along the building. Tends to be a nice idea in concept, but you often find it to be a little bit controversial because during the winter, there's no green if the trees are not well maintained, which can be hard to do that many floors up, depending on how the foundations of the soil are built. You just hope that it's maintained and it can actually look like it does in the renderings, but that often does remain to be seen. If I can remember, I'll throw up a picture as well of the spiral, which was, I think it's just topped out in the Hudson Yards area. And that also is meant to have a bunch of green terraces kind of wrapping around it. I think the Penn 15 building near Penn Station, yes, that's its name. Yes, it's ridiculous. I believe that is meant to have some amount of terraces. That's kind of like the new trend. You know, give your workers an outdoor space when they're stuck inside an office building. Again, nice in concept, but the execution often remains to be seen. So yeah, let me know down below, what do you think of World Trade Center 2? What design would you like to see built? The original Norman Foster, the most recent Norman Foster, or would you like to see something else entirely? Is there maybe a particular architect that you would love to see take a crack at a building like this and build it into the fabric of New York? Because if you're gonna make it this big, it is absolutely going to look enormous and be seen from all over the city. But that's what New York is for, tall buildings, so let's get down to it at some point. Thank you all so very much for sticking around today. I'm I Think You Know. This is our New York 1-to-1 build, and talk to you next time. Bye.